This is my local Target's toy section. It has a lot of different toys, from toy cars, Lego, whatever scraps of Transformers they may have, and internet brain rot. But two shelf spaces are dedicated to the Barbie aisle, a bombastic glitter heaven with plenty of choices. And why wouldn't Barbie have all this space to her pink empire? The Barbie movie grossed $1 billion and became the highest grossing movie of the year, and getting a lot of high praise and even a Best Picture nomination at the Oscars, like that means anything. Reinvigorating the barbaric, boisterous brand of Barbara. I just find it all funny because growing up, there was a time when the Barbie aisle was a fraction of this size. You know what was taking up those aisles back in the early 2000s? Kicking Barbie's plastic astic? I'll give you a hint. They start with a B. God damn it, I'm talking about Bratz, you idiots! Sorry!
Passion for fashion, passion for fashion, passion for fashion.
Bratz hit the scene, and for the first time ever, Miss Barbara Rogers had known war. 4 girls with a passion for fashion, and for a brief period, things looked bad for Barbie. And yet, more than 20 years later, this is all that remains of the Bratz section. That's it. Skippity Toilet has more representation. How was it that for a brief period, Barbie, the name in fashion dolls, to the point where people will call fashion dolls Barbies, had lost out to these 4? It was so sudden and so brief, you'd swear it never happened. And Mattel tried to pretend it wasn't happening.
I believe that they're very much there to kind of just appeal to girls on a very surface level with regard to fashion. And that's the only element that they try to focus on. And it's our belief that they don't encourage things like courage.
But it did indeed happen. So join me today as I talk about the rise and fall of the Bratz.
Hey, sorry for the interruption, but have you subscribed yet? Well, why not? Because not everyone who watches this video may be subscribed. I upload new videos weekly alongside other shorts and live streams, so hit subscribe and hit the bell for updates on new videos. Once I hit 7,500 subscribers, I'm planning a big retrospective on Metroplex, so that's something to get excited for. Also, consider becoming a channel member. Your financial support goes into making these videos and would be a massive help. Thank you so much. Now back to the video.
Before we address the Bratz, it's important we talk about where Barbie was when the Bratz arrived. Because you have to remember, before the early 2000s, the fashion doll market was basically Barbie and almost no one else. Since her debut in the 1950s, Barbie had no enemies. Sure, there were attempts like Gem in the 80s, but quite frankly, Gem dolls tend to be forgotten compared to the show in later comics. The most competition Barbie had were local dolls such as Takara's Lika-chan in Japan, New Boy's Fola dolls for Middle Eastern countries, and Hasbro's Cindy for the UK. Who Hasbro actually did try to turn more into a Barbie clone, resulting in a lawsuit by Mattel. In the business, we call that foreshadowing. After the megastorm success of the 80s, the Barbie brand reached an all-time peak in the early 90s with the highest selling Barbie ever, with Totally Hair Barbie earning $100 million alone in 1992, and the highest selling Ken doll ever with Earring Magic Ken, which got there by being bought in droves by swaths of homosexual men. But at the peak of her sales, there was a shift with women in pop culture, at least in the West. It's hard to fully describe, but the easiest point of reference is with music. At the record industry's peak, there was a massive shift with women in music. For a lot of the 1980s, Barbie reflected what was going on in popular music. Very glittery, flashy, and all with a particularly trademarkable shade of the color pink. And she continued that into the 90s. But that's not what was going on with women by then. By the 90s, women in music were either angry and gritty like the punk scene, authentic and conservative like the Lilith Fair scene, or in-your-face or sexual like a lot of the R&B and female-led hip-hop of the time. Barbie just didn't belong. Even Madonna, the material girl herself, became in-your-face with her sexuality in the early 90s, and then spiritual in the late 90s, and then political in the early 2000s.
I'm drinking a soy latte. I get a double shot. It goes through my body, and you know I'm satisfied.
There was glamour, but in a Calvin Klein commercial way, and not piñata colors. We could have a singer named Pink, but she didn't really wear a lot of bright pink. And by the early 2000s, the idea of a white, blonde, California material girl image had basically become stock parody. The only pop performer left who kept up that game really was Britney Spears. Britney and Barbie were used as stock parody to represent everything wrong with women, from her rail-thin body to the fact she wore pink to the fact she was literally made of plastic. I remember when Pink released her song Stupid Girls, which is basically a song lamenting how girls want to be idiots and bimbos, and features a hope spot at the end of a girl abandoning her dolls and plushies to go play football. Yeah, f your imagination and characters. Get to know Pink is the equivalent of your dad that wants you to put down your stupid action figures and go do some sports. Okay, I'm being a little facetious, but you get my point, right? Taste had seriously changed, and by 2001, Barbie's sales had been declining a bit, but she was still the top bitch on campus. No one could stand up to her. Who could? Certainly not a toy company who by that point their specialty was licensed walkie-talkies. Well, that's exactly what happened. MGA Entertainment, founded by Iranian immigrant Isaac Larian, had little history leading up to this point. Their big thing up to then were LCD handheld games and, as I mentioned before, licensed walkie-talkies. Nothing really that impressive, but his company gained a big-time talent with fashion and doll designer Carter Bryant from Mattel. Carter felt stifled by the don't think, only pink mindset of Mattel and came up with the idea of bratty teenage girl dolls, with the idea of them being the cool girls from their school. And their designs were atypical of other dolls, with a big-headed look inspired by those terrifying Steve Madden big head commercials. He brought them up to Mattel at first while working there, but they weren't interested. And then he brought them to MGA, and at first, Isaac Larian wasn't too impressed. But, not one to mince words, Isaac thought they looked pretty ugly.
I thought it was weird, I thought it was ugly.
I mean, it is a very out there art style. They don't even have noses. What would happen if one sneezed?
Sorry, guys.
But then his daughter, who at the time would have been roughly 13 years old, took interest, and thus Isaac took interest. And on May 21st of 2001, the original Fab Four of the Bratz were released. Chloe, Jade, Sasha, and Yasmin, who I swear was sometimes called Jasmine in some commercials, but maybe I'm wrong. Is this one of those Mandela effect things? Or more likely, I'm just an idiot. At first, the dolls weren't a big success, but the word of mouth grew and grew. And by Christmas of that year, they were the most in-demand girls' toy. And by 2005, they had earned anywhere from $1 billion to $2 billion US in sales. And by Christmas of 2006, Bratz had taken over 40% of the fashion doll market. Remember, at that time, the only competition was Barbie, and in many parts of America and the world, you could argue that Barbie had become almost invisible. How did this happen? How, in such a short amount of time, did Jean Bedel Barbisa I lose so much of her nation? Let's dive into it. So like I mentioned earlier in the video, there was the whole culture shift in the early 2000s, and I hate to say it, Bratz fit more into what was going on than Barbie. If you look at Barbie's commercials from the 80s to the early 2000s, they're basically unchanged in style and technique. But Bratz, from the get-go, had that ever mysterious entity to marketing, attitude. Mattel were a very conservative company. They were very protective of Barbie's image and didn't want to risk hurting her perception. Isaac Larian, however, was bombastic and bold, coming from a blue-collar dishwashing background and emigrated from Iran. He had nothing to lose. Barbie was magical and poppy. Bratz was more grounded, and the music was more R&B, hip-hop, and pop-punk. The design language for the marketing was still pink, but less saturated, and the outfits were wild, and even a bit risque at times. Carter had free reign to go all out with the clothes, and good lord he did, approaching the designs more akin to a Paris fashion show than a children's doll. And honestly looking better than most fashion shows. Also, Bratz had a very different design from the typical fashion doll look, going for something a lot more cartoony and with big ol' eyes. And the dolls came out around the time of the big anime boom in North America, and while not anime, these design traits did help them fit in with the zeitgeist. All this did well to appeal to a wider demographic than Barbie would have. Remember, Isaac's daughter was around 13, well after a lot of girls would have grown out of Barbie, and a bit after the Barbie stripping and torture phase. Don't lie to yourself, women. You've gone through this phase. Contrary to Barbie, the news talked about the demographics for Bratz being 5 to 15. Well older and wider than Barbie's demographic typically was. From a distribution side, MGA had worked with plenty of other toy companies over the years, such as Bandai and Toei, and so they were able to get great distribution in Europe and Japan. And also apparently they were called Cool Bratz in Japan, which is a bit silly, but I kind of love it. And probably the biggest thing that got people's attention for a lot of young girls was they were a multiracial cast from the get-go. There have been multiracial Barbie dolls since the late 60s with Christie, even earlier if you included Colored Francie, who was a literal race swap toy, but they were always an afterthought essentially. Hell, Barbie's supporting cast were typically interchangeable. They never really had cemented names outside of Teresa and maybe Midge, and that's because she has the unfortunate character trait of being called Midge, and being the only Barbie who managed to have sex. Unlike Barbie, however, they came out multiracial, with Yasmin even being biracial, being of both Latina and Persian ancestry. Remember, this was post 9/11 when the Arabic Sinbad the Sailor was turned to Greek in the movie around that time. And bear in mind, they weren't hyped up in a pandering fashion, patting themselves on the back way about it. They were all presented very naturally as a multiracial group of friends who just like to hang out, jam to music, and ride horses with diamond-studded saddles that just look rough. Have you ever seen Cruel Intentions 2? Heck, you know those Naturalista dolls or some of the later black Barbies that made a big deal about having naturally curly hair? Sasha was rocking that in a lot of dolls more than a decade before any of them hit the scene. And Isaac had no restraint when it came to other media compared to Mattel. He immediately started licensing out Bratz to anything and everything. Video games, direct-to-DVD movies, music, magazines, plenty of spin-offs like Bratz Kids, Bratz Babies, and a lot of animals. And a cartoon, which I've never watched properly, but I've seen a lot of out-of-context clips of.
Girlfriend, stop! Get back in the car!
Well, Ma, is that Donald Trump? Where?
All of this, and it's no wonder Barbie couldn't compete. Not that Mattel didn't try. Mattel released a spin-off of Barbie called Mycene that attempted to appeal to tweens in the same way Bratz was, with a more mature look, toonier makeup and faces, and while it did alright in terms of sales, it was never going to put a dent in the Bratz battalion. They just kinda still looked like Barbies, just with slightly flashier clothing. And they even dropped Barbie later on. And nowadays the line is pretty forgotten, outside of a brief scene in one of the direct-to-DVD movies. Why?
Jim, it's Harvey Weinstein.
Good job, young lady.
Thanks.
Barbie, run. And Mattel tried another heavily hip-hop influenced line to compete with Bratz called Flavas, which I'm just gonna read the Wikipedia page for. They are multi-ethnic and have an urban hip-hop style with bling-bling jewelry and stick-on tattoos, described as ghetto fabulous by Newsweek. They have an urban sensibility and are dressed in hip-hop fashions. Their accessories include ghetto blasters, cell phones, bling-bling jewelry, and stick-on tattoos. God. Oh my God. Oh, you don't. So neither of these worked and Bratz was still dominating. In fact, in response to Mycene, MGA revised Bratz's tagline to read, "The only girls with a passion for fashion."
Oh, snap!
So things were looking up for the Bratz brand. It wasn't without its share of controversies, with lots of accusations of the Bratz being over-sexualized.
Caricature. The head's disproportionately big, the lips are ridiculously pouty and puffed, and the look of the clothing is exaggerated in the same way.
That flashy Bratz look might be thrilling for kids, but it strikes fear in the hearts of parents who see it as alarmingly sexy. Even the name has a defiant ring that taunts adults.
I really don't want her to be a brat, and I don't think that really encourages the proper behavior, and I really don't like the way the dolls are dressed. I don't feel that's appropriate for them to be wearing high-heeled platform shoes, mini skirts, and midriff tops.
Nothing unfamiliar to girls' toys, and especially for Bratz, which skewed older. But none of this hurt the brand. Isaac was certainly confident going into 2007.
What's going to happen to Barbie?
He's like Mike Tyson. He says, "I'm not retiring." What happened to him? He got beat to a point that he has to retire.
So what went wrong? So if Mattel couldn't beat them in the market, it was time to do it legally. And I mean in terms of suing. They weren't planning on killing the Bratz. Hopefully. On June 2006, Mattel sued MGA for $500 million. They claimed that because Carter Bryant came up with and proposed the idea of Bratz while working as an employee at Mattel, they technically owned the rights to the Bratz. Now that sounds dubious to a lot of you, I'm sure, but ownership of ideas is a big thing in the industry. See also the Spectre rights issues for James Bond. MGA and Mattel went to war, and regardless of how much MGA fought the suit, they would end up losing initially. MGA would end up paying out $100 million to Mattel, with the verdict claiming that only the first iteration of Bratz belonged to Mattel, and that the succeeding generations innovated enough away from the initial ideas. Now, Mattel did try to wrestle away the rights to the Bratz themselves, but that ended up failing, and in fact it was revealed that Mattel had stolen trade secrets from NGA and had to pay $88 million back in 2011. Now, there was an era of uncertainty during all of this, and in 2009, MGA scaled back Bratz a little bit and even made a new doll called Moxie Girl, just in case they lost the rights to Bratz. Moxie toned down some of the brattier elements, but, well, Moxie's services were short-lived. But I don't think the lawsuit is what ended up killing Bratz. Bratz was MGA's cash cow. They weren't going to stop milking their plastic teats just because of a silly lawsuit. In fact, there were still plenty of Bratz toy releases during that time. I think what actually hurt Bratz way more was, well, the craze had run its course. Like I said, Bratz were merchandised to hell and back, and maybe a bit too exposed. Like I said, Bratz were cool because they skewed a bit older than Barbie and had a bit more of an edge and attitude. That made them unique from other fashion dolls. It's hard to do that when you have infantile Bratz saving Christmas. And even the artwork and general vibe replaced a lot of the hip-hop and hot topic vibe with a lot more general cuteness that's more so Barbie's wheelhouse. And that's not even getting into the franchise's biggest failure. In 2007, Lionsgate released Bratz the movie, the franchise's first and so far only attempt at live action. And also the second movie based on a toy line in 2007 that has John Voight, which might be just too many.
Are 48 distinct cliques. The goths, the skaters, the nerds, the disco dorks, the football jocks, the loners.
Leave me alone.
And yeah, needless to say, it was not a success, failing to break even at the box office and being thoroughly panned by critics.
Now, you can't expect much of a movie based on a line of dolls, although I'm still hoping that the Chatty Cathy project comes through one day. But the second worst movie of the year, Bratz, was even more odious than anticipated. The plot is just a Mean Girls ripoff, but what's really offensive about Bratz is the double standard. They're telling us the only thing that matters is what's inside, but they're showing us adolescent girls who dress like anime hookers and swivel their hips as if they're attending Lap Dance High.
And it's the epitome of the decline of the Bratz brand, because it clearly wanted to be one of many teen comedies that were coming out at the time, like Mean Girls, Bring It On, or John Tucker Must Die. But how are you going to compete with the raunch and sass of those movies when you're rated PG for thematic elements? Oh, you can't take it to the movie, Sally. It has thematic elements. Very disappointing outing from the writer of Code Monkeys, Crank Yankers, and Minority Team. No, I'm not making that up. A flop that big and that visible seriously hurt Bratz as a brand, and by 2009, the brand was in freefall. MGA attempted a reboot in 2010 with new characters and new designs, but it was too little too late. Now, of course, Bratz never really left and still going to this day, and I imagine there are some kids that get them on occasion. But it seems as though the line is almost exclusively adult-oriented now. What with tie-ins to mature media you wouldn't exactly want your kids to watch, like Mean Girls, Euphoria, or Jennifer's Body. Especially the latter. No one should be exposed to a Diablo Cody movie. But while the Bratz fads has passed, Bratz was still kind of influential and ahead of its time. It had a diverse cast of characters that was pretty eye-catching for the time. Its graphical style was surprisingly pretty influential for a lot of the 2000s, for better or worse. Not just for toys, and it showed there was room in the fashion doll market for someone other than Barbie. MGA has since put a lot more focus on their Lol surprise doll brand, but you can definitely still see a lot of the Bratz influence in marketing tactics, even having its own share of controversy. Mattel, meanwhile, I think actually did learn from the experience overall, and while they felt like Barbie was best suited to continue being Barbie, they opted to create a new doll line with Monster High, which did take some notes from Bratz, but very quickly became its own thing, and a big hit, and going for a very visually and ethnically diverse cast, appealing to a wider age group, and an emphasis on stylization that proved to be just as popular as Bratz in their day, if not more so, and with minimal controversies, unless you're the most hardcore pundits with too much time on their hands. If anything, Bratz set the ground for much more space in the fashion dolls world. While Barbie is always going to remain the biggest, there's now a lot more room on the shelves for other toys. And in the years since then, there's been a reevaluation of the entire fashion doll market, especially in the lead up to the Barbie movie. What was once an easy target has seen some defense and reevaluation from girls, women, and even men, sharing their stories, showing off their creativity with customization, design, storytelling. The whole anti-Barbie mania in hindsight, a lot of it came off like the anti-Halloween movement, or the anti-Dungeons & Dragons movement. Not that there aren't valid concerns about children, but a lot of it quite frankly comes off as imagined threats. People seeing in their head what they want to complain about. And that's not getting into the pop culture against the very idea of a Barbie-like figure. Like I said, Barbie was used as a stand-in often for people like Britney Spears, which we all know a lot of the backlash against her aged like a fine glass of milk. And I think a lot of the reevaluation can apply to Barbie too. Pop culture became a lot more accepting towards girly girl style, and the whole not like other girls mindset and the attempt at rejecting what they perceived as weak femininity looks pretty ugly in hindsight, with a lot of those people coming off as Liz Lemon in that 30 Rock clip.
Hey Liz, how's the telescope? I don't know, Kelsey, how's your mom's pill addiction?
Ironically, in an effort to rebel against a perceived corporate patriarchal image, a lot of the backlash felt like it could be just as controlling and hurtful. Bet you weren't ready for a discussion on gender politics from a man who makes dick and butt jokes with his Transformers. So tell me, how do you feel about Bratz as a toy line? Did you have any growing up? Did you love them? Did you hate them? Let me know in the comments. Please subscribe. And yeah, I did this video so I wouldn't have to buy anything. I got enough weird looks in the Transformers aisle.